Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and I was watching a video by Steve Farmer a few days ago, and it was he presented a game from the last round of the Tucson Open, and it was such an interesting game that I thought I would take a look at it myself, and actually found, I think, quite a few lines, found a number of lines where I had some disagreement. So, he did a tremendous amount of work on this, on that game. And so you can think of this video really as more of a supplement to what he did than an alternative vision. By and large, I think he did a very good job, a very thorough job. But since I think there's some gaps and some places where I maybe disagree a little bit, I think that this will hopefully be a nice supplement to what he did. Okay, so this was played, as I said, in the last round of the Tucson Open this year, 2010. White was, I guess, an 11-year-old kid named Brian Hugh. Yuck. They're getting too young. He's 2069. And black, who won this game, is Jason Mueller, 2087 player. And as a result of his win, he actually managed to tie for first. Very impressive performance, tying with Levon Eltunian, if I remember correctly. Okay, well, let's take a look at this game. And I guess I could flip it around. So some people like it that way when black wins, so we'll do that. All right, so we've got the old Blumenfeld Gambit. Now, one thing I want to mention about his presentation, and I think it's something of general interest. So I got kind of an impression from him that he has sort of a dubious attitude towards whites accepting the gambit. And he cited a very famous game between Tarash and Alekhine, played in Pistion in 1922. And so he recommends instead playing bishop to g5, or at least seemed to. Now, it's very interesting for me because I grew up with basically the exact same template for evaluating this. So I saw that game when I was a kid too, and read that bishop to g5 is the cure, or at least white's best way of handling it. And it's very natural too. I mean, first of all, if you see that game, you'll see that Alekhine basically smokes him. And, it's easy to be quite impressed by black's enormous pawn center, and the bishops go to d6 and to b7, where they're swooping down on white's king side, which we're going to see in this game. And you put all this together, and it becomes a perfect sort of perfect storm for adopting this view as your own. And actually, I can relate a number of similar experiences that I've had. So I remember as a kid, there was this friend of mine. We played hundreds, if not thousands. In fact, I would say surely thousands of games together. And, occasionally we had little disasters against each other. So I remember in the early days of us playing, I was white in a Nimzo-Indian, and I'll show you what happened here. So it went like this. Actually, let me start a new variation. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop to b4, a3. He didn't know what he was doing and played bishop to a5. I played b4. And I can't recall him ever playing the Nimzo-Indian again. So the opening was just ruined for him after this one game. On the other hand, I played a Dutch once against him and somehow contrived to get myself mated, or at least in a position where I was going to be mated by force after 8 moves. And after that, that was the end of my Dutch experiences for forever, or at least for a long time, on the black side of it. Now, frankly, I think I got a much better deal there than he did. So he rescued me from playing an awful opening. Okay, I'm exaggerating. Don't write me. While I unfortunately cured him of playing a very good one. But, there's similar kinds of experiences. Another classic example is the advanced Caro-Kann. So many of us, including myself, but higher level players as well for many years, were, I think, frightened off of the advanced Caro-Kann because they saw the famous game Nimzowitsch-Capablanca, played in New York in 1927. Nimzowitsch played bishop d3. Okay, black took, and went for a French structure, and he basically just outplayed Nimzowitsch very easily, and it just looked like the advanced Caro-Kann was stupid. It gave black the chance to get into a favorable French, where he's traded off his bad bishop at the cost of a pretty insignificant tempo, and at best maybe white can equalize. And then it was realized, okay, we don't have to play bishop to d3, although even this might not be so bad, but we don't have to play it. We can we can do two things with the light squared bishop. We can either make it a target, as occurs, for example, in the line that used to be very popular about 10 years ago, like this, and h4, or knight g to e2 first, actually. And let's say c5, and now h4, h5, knight f4 is an example. Or other lines that are popular nowadays seek to just ignore this bishop, make it completely irrelevant, and in fact white can try to play on the queen side and show that the bishop on f5 hurts black because it can no longer help to defend some of the potentially weak light squares over on the queen side. So the point is that it's very easy to be heavily influenced by some kind of template game, some kind of model game where one side plays chess and the other side applauds. It's a completely one-sided game. Oh, another example would be the famous Argentine massacre in the Goldberg variation in the Najdorf Sicilian. So there too, until Fischer actually played it, and even then it didn't really fully come back into play for a long time. The famous 3 wins by the Soviets over the 3 Argentinian players put that line out of business for a long time. So you have to be a little bit careful about this. The Taras-Shiliakin game is very impressive, but it shouldn't be viewed as at all normative for what can happen. So I think nowadays actually d takes e6 is considered much more critical variation. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip this back around. All right, here one possibility which Farmer mentions, but I don't think if I remember right, he doesn't really elaborate too much on it, is e4. And I just thought I'd show you some cute lines in this variation. So c takes b5 is the main line. It's the principled move. It's what happened in the game, but e4 is quite interesting. So takes, bishop to d3, and white is going to try to take advantage of the weak diagonals to the black king. Black has a couple of moves here. He could play queen a5 check, and I think this is interesting. It has a good idea to try to block white's bishop on c1 and in some way impede his coordination a little bit. So knight f6. Now white probably has nothing better than taking. d5, knight g5. The idea of playing knight or bishop takes h7 and then queen h5 check when the knight recaptures. So bishop to d6, queen c2. Okay, still another idea. a6, bishop g6, kind of funny. King f8, knight f7, takes. And okay, white's up a full exchange, but obviously black's pawn roller there is pretty imposing looking as well, and he's got the bishop here. So this is a pretty unclear position, dynamically balanced position. Okay, another line, bishop to b7, c takes b5, a6, castles, ab, rook e1, knight f6, and knight to g5. So again, same idea, very, very aggressive. White is not playing materialistically, and indeed, if he doesn't have anything really going with this attack, black will probably just roll him off the board with this massive pawn phalanx. But for now, white has nice attacking chances. So queen h7, bishop takes h7, king e7. The point of this is to shore up e6 and also just get out of the way of the check, because now if the bishop moves, h2 hangs. So queen c2 is forced, knight h7, and now a very interesting and tricky move, queen to g6. Now, you might wonder what exactly the idea of this move is. Well, let's suppose black preserves the knight. What should white do here? So this is a pretty cool variation. Okay, the answer is rook takes e6 check. Now, if you take the rook, it's easy. Queen f7 check. Okay, if king to d6, queen takes e6 as mate. And if king to d8, this is just as bad, mate in 2. So king to d8 is the move. And now what does white do? So, you can play knight f7 check and knight takes h8. That probably isn't so bad. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe it is bad, but much, much better, in any case, is queen takes f6. So this is a killer. Takes, knight f7, rook e8. So we win the queen, and we even get more. Bishop to f4 check. If the king moves, the knight on b8 falls, and after d6, well, we just take, and white is completely winning with a rook and 2 pawns for a minor piece. Alright, so that's just for fun. It's not really part of the game, but I just thought I would elaborate on that interesting sideline that he mentioned. Okay, so c takes b5, d5, And here white has a lot of ways to proceed. E3 is chosen in the game is one of the normal ways to continue, but it is a little bit passive, relatively speaking. So two other plans. One is to play G3 and just to fianchetto, which, whatever its merits, certainly will at least immunize white from the kind of attack we see in the game. Probably the main approach is to play knight to C3 and then follow up with a quick E4. And a couple of possibilities here. So if bishop to B7, E4, anyway. And the point is that white doesn't at all mind if black recaptures, because instead of having this beautiful pawn center, I mean, look at what would happen here. If knight takes E4, knight E4, DE, queen D8, king D8, and from beautiful pawns, now they're kind of nauseating with 4 isolated pawns here, and after, let's say, knight to G5, white is in great shape. So this is much better for white. So here, black plays D4, and then the key idea for white is to play E5. Alright, black typically doesn't take the knight, but saves his own. Knight to B1, and then here, if bishop to E7, bishop C4 is a little bit better for white. Black can also try A6, and this is interesting as well. Okay, so I think actually the main move, instead of bishop to B7, is knight B to D7. And there were actually a couple of games played in this line in the last week or two. So E4, D4, E5, knight to G4, and then here, knight to E4 immediately gets played sometimes after bishop to B7, then knight F to G5 is very interesting. But I think knight to G5 is even more common. Knight to G5, pardon me. So, still threatening to take the knight on G4, also threatening to take on E6. And here, knight D takes E5 is normal, and this occurred in the game Monokroussos against Vallejo Pawns in Gibraltar, which is still going on. I guess it's finishing today, as I'm giving this lecture anyway, and as if it comes up, if it gets posted today, it'll be on the day of the posting as well. Anyway, instead of what was played in that game, which I think was knight C to E4, F4 is better, and this has been played in quite a few games, including one from Vaikonze a week or two ago between Nybak and I think it was Anna Muzichuk, not Maria, but Anna, I'm pretty sure. I think it was in the B group. So very, very difficult position for black. Muzichuk managed to hold, but it was work, and a lot of players have managed to lose this position with black. Alright, so now to the game. E3, bishop to D6. And here Steve says black is equalized, and I think this is premature. So in the database, this E3 line has been played pretty regularly, and white has a normal kind of score, like a 57% score. So I think it's premature. Even if E3 isn't the most incisive line like knight C3 and E4, I think it's too quick. So we shouldn't be so impressed by, again, the famous Taras-Ilyekin game, or by what happens in this game for that matter. It's still not so clear. I would definitely agree with him that white's move here, bishop to E2, is a little bit of a timid choice, and knight to C3 is a bit better, knight B to D7, and so on. So alright, bishop to E2, castles, castles. But even here, I'm not so sure that black is equal yet. For instance, there are a number of games with bishop to B7. For example, there's a 2005 game between Krasenkov, who's a very, very strong grandmaster. I mean, this guy has been 2,700 or on the verge of 2,700. And if he's playing this, then I think it says that there's something going for the line. So the game continued knight B to D2, queen E7, queen C2, knight B to D7, B3. So you can see, I mean, white is playing kind of a restrained setup, but he's keeping his pieces out of danger from white's pawns. He's going to finish his development, and then make some kind of break like E4, or try to achieve something else elsewhere on the board. So in the game Krasenkov against Werner, as we would read it here in the U.S., rook A to C8 was played, bishop to A3, knight E4, which doesn't really look very appealing, but okay, it ruins his pawn structure, but he's going for a kingside play. Takes, knight to D2, queen H4, G3, queen H3, knight E4, knight F6, bishop F3, takes, knight to G4. So black has broken through and he wins material, but after this series here, white has terrific compensation. So white has a bishop and a pawn for the rook. His pawn structure is quite good. Black's structure is not so good. Black's attack is completely over. White's bishop on e4 is dominant, and white went on to win in another 13 moves. So I'm not so positive that black is just equal here. It's an impressive looking position, but when black's pieces start going forward, if white handles everything right, there are ways to kind of punch holes in the position. All right, so Mueller played queen to e7, which I think is a perfectly good move. Knight c3, bishop to b7. a6 is interesting too, and then white should play the central rake with e4, and I think he's probably a little bit better. Okay, so bishop to b7, and here I think white starts to kind of lose the thread of the game. Maybe b3 is safest, a la Krasenkov, although it would have made more sense maybe with the knight on d2 instead. Queen to c2 is also okay, and then playing rook to d1. And finally, even e4 is okay, although I think black is doing fine as well. So takes, knight to d2, and then one interesting way to play is e3, and then knight to d7. None of these double bishop sacrifices work, and queen h4 is bad as well. But after knight to d7, now queen h4 is on the agenda, and either knight to c4, attacking the bishop, or knight f3. I think in both cases the position is roughly equal. All right. Well, in the game, white played queen to b3, which I don't think is so strong. But okay, his idea is perhaps to play e4, and after some captures, play knight to g5 with pressure against e6. So it has a decent idea behind it, certainly. Knight b to d7, rook to d1, knight to g4. And here, yeah, queen to a4 is objectively probably just the losing move. So he had to play h3, which I believe Steve pointed out, but after knight g to e5 takes, I think, I'm trying to remember if he gave knight takes e5 or bishop e5 here, but I think white is still slightly better here. So for instance, okay, if knight e5, f4, c4, queen c2, knight g6, and g3. And I think, alright, to be honest, I would be fairly comfortable with black here, but I think white actually has enough restraint of black's position that maybe he's still a little bit better. But okay, this is, I think practically speaking, it's very easy for white to screw this up. If bishop takes e5, then queen c2, and again f4, and alright, again, you know, it's a position where black certainly has played, but I think white is okay. Black still needs to prove that he has more than enough compensation for the pawn, or even full compensation. But very playable for black too, and as I said, I think it's more dangerous for white. Okay, well anyway, queen a4 is just completely dangerous because it's in fact losing. So d4, e takes d4. Now here I'm a little confused by Steve's comments. I think in his video he said, objectively speaking, white is okay. But in fact I think he's just losing here. On the other hand, you know, after I looked at this game and worked up some notes of my own, I asked Steve for some information about it, and he actually was kind enough to send the PGN of his notes to the game. And it seems like he in fact agrees that with bishop takes f3, black has a serious advantage. So I'll give some of my lines because they differ from in some points from what he gave. So after bishop takes f3, actually before I give these lines, let me just discuss this position a little bit. So in the game, black played rook takes f3. And okay, clearly getting rid of this knight makes great sense because then h2 is dropping and the queen can come to h4. So it's a great idea to get rid of this knight. But which way should we do it? The bishop looks really impressive on b7. On the other hand, okay, the rook is very good on f8 as well. So, you know, from a general principles point of view, I would probably, well, I'm actually not sure. I think I would probably play bishop takes f3 if I couldn't calculate everything out. But it's a toss-up. Because the thing with rook takes f3, you might think like this. I've got a second rook I can bring to f8 later, but I only have one bishop. So it might behoove me to keep the unique piece and trade off the semi-superfluous one. So, and certainly it's quite dangerous in either case. I mean, practically speaking, white's situation is next to hopeless if white isn't a computer or a super grandmaster. But anyway, objectively speaking, I think bishop takes f3 is the better move, while after rook takes f3, white can draw. There's a line with perpetual check. So we'll see all this shortly. So bishop f3, queen h4, and white can try various defenses here. Essentially, what he's got to worry about is the f2 pawn. Okay, the h pawn, trying to defend that is a complete waste of time. So I mean, something like h3. All right, just off the top of my head, queen takes f2 check, king h1, rook takes f3. Maybe there's even better than this, but this looks pretty hideous. With the point that we have rook to h3 coming next. Well, we're also threatening queen f1 mate. So on this, we can mate with queen f1 and rook f1, or we could play rook h3 and queen h2. I mean, it's just a complete disaster. So, and of course, if g takes f3, queen h2 is mate. And I mean, you could just do anything you want in a position like this. You could play queen takes f3 and bishop to h2 mate. I mean, this is pulling the wings off of a fly. I mean, this position. You can just do whatever you want to your opponent. All right, so two moves that do deserve consideration are moves that defend the f-pawn. Of course, you can't play rook f1 because of queen h2 mate. So knight e4 and queen c2. So let's knock them out. Knight e4. Okay, rook takes f3. G takes f3, and now queen h3. So this is a typical trick that it's very useful to keep in mind. It's very easy when we're attacking to just look at checks and captures, and that's rightly so. I mean, you should look at them, but not to the exclusion of other moves, especially when checking sequences can often drive the opponent's king out into relative safety. So white's king would just love to be on e2. I mean, white would probably slip black a small bribe if you could get him to do that in the game. So queen h3, cutting off the exit, is a very good idea. And so now the threat, if it's black's moves, to play bishop takes h2, king h1, bishop to g3 check, king goes back to g1, bishop takes f2 check, the king has no move, so knight takes f2 is forced, and then queen h2 check, followed by queen takes f2 mate. So probably the best for white is just to rip off this knight, but as we'll see, black can still win. So bishop h2, king h1, bishop g3, king g1, queen h2, and now we take the knight. And now kind of a goofy line, which I don't recall Steve presenting this in the video. Maybe he did, but he does give it in his notes. So anyway, rook to f8, and it's kind of surprising. I mean, white's king looks like it's fairly safe, but it still isn't. So the threat is rook takes f2, followed by queen e3 mate. And if f takes g3, then white has this remarkable idea, knight to b6. The idea is just to play c4 next, and this prevents the white king from escaping to d3. So we see a lot of black's attack here is based on sealing off the exits. And the point is after queen to c3, check, and rook f1 is mate. So going back to the position after rook to f8, if white defends the pawn with rook f1, then another pretty spectacular move, knight to e5, taking advantage of this pin here, and again, sealing the exit. So if queen to d1, queen takes g4, knight f3, and now c takes d4. So it's a very, very long and involved variation. And it's maybe not over yet, but basically material is close to even, but white's king still hasn't found safety, and black can just continue to play very actively. So just a sample. F takes e3, and black is winning. Black is up material here. The problem is that if f takes g3, then we have e2 with this as the key point, forking the king and queen. Alright, so knight to e4 is a very good try, but with, again, very accurate play, with special notice on black's part, or special attention on black's part to sealing off the exits. Black can win. Okay, on queen to c2, here I have a line that he doesn't give that I think is maybe more effective than his. So in this position, the winning move, or at least the winning move that I'm going to present, is c takes d4. And this looks rather banal. I mean, who cares about this d pawn? Well, the reason we care is that black's knight is going to get to the e5 square, and it turns out to be very useful. So rook d4, rook f3. Big threats here, queen h2 and queen h1, followed by rook takes f2. So takes. And now knight d to e5, threatening to hop into f3. And, okay, white has a choice, not a great choice. If he plays rook takes d6, so just ignoring all of the black ideas. Now we don't take on f3 yet. We play queen to h3. Now threatening knight takes f3 with mate in 2, and also threatening to use the second knight as well, and to bring it into the action. So rook d3, knight h2, white's lost. No defense to this threat, or no good defense. I mean, he could play queen to d1, then knight takes d3, queen takes d3, knight takes f3, and white ends up down queen for 2 pieces. So rook takes g4, knight f3, king f1, knight h2, and knight takes g4. And believe it or not, after all of that, material is even, and even the same distribution of material as well. But the position is not even at all. White is undeveloped and his king is exposed and in the center. Black is winning here. So bishop takes f3 is a winning move, and very difficult to calculate all of this, especially in the knight to e4 line. I mean, that line is exceptionally difficult, but again, objectively speaking, black is winning there. Okay, so in the game, rook takes f3 was played. It's objectively a mistake, but white still has tremendous problems to solve. Okay, so if g takes f3, queen h4, forces mate almost immediately. So bishop takes f3. Here, if bishop takes f3, it's just a draw. Knight h2, takes, queen b4, knight f3, and it doesn't seem that black has anything more than a draw. But okay, the natural move is queen to h4, and this is what was played in the game. And here, white goes astray. Having briefly had a chance to equalize, it now runs away. So here's his one chance. There's a few moves that can be played here. Rook to d2 loses, protecting f2. Bishop f3, gf3. And here, instead of knight takes h2, again I like queen to h3. So f takes g4, bishop h2, king h1, bishop f4, king g1, and now the very nice quiet move, rook to f8. The idea here, if it's black to move, is this. Bishop h2 check, king h1, bishop g3, then queen h2, and rook f2 with mate next move. If king e1, queen to g1 is mate. If rook f2, queen takes f2 is mate. Okay, so that's the threat. So again, white needs to shore up the f2 pawn. Knight e4, but then once again we have this checking sequence picking up the knight, after which the win is inevitable. So bishop to e3, and for instance, if queen a5, queen h1, and c4, again, sealing off the exits, mate or dramatic win of material is forthcoming. Okay, so rook to d2, going back, is not going to hold on. However, bishop takes g4, and I believe Steve gives this variation, is a draw. So queen h2, queen g2, queen g1, queen takes g4, bishop f4, and it looks like there's just nothing better for black than to give a perpetual check on this kind of seesaw over here. So that was white's one chance to save the game. Understandably, he missed it. It's actually not that difficult of a line to consider, but the problem is that you're calculating so many variations, and you get more and more tired, and if you don't have the good luck of calculating the right line first, your head starts to swim, and it's practically very difficult. So even though this isn't that difficult a line to calculate, still, you have to look at quiet moves like queen takes g4, maybe rook to f8, hitting f2. I mean, there's a lot of things to look at. So, even though I'm sure both players could calculate a variation like this, there are so many alternatives along the way that it's a mess. So in the game, white played queen to c2. Very natural move. bringing the queen back into the action, protecting f2. Okay, here black's best move would have been rook to f8 instead of bishop takes f3. So using that superfluous rook, as we mentioned before. And here I think black is winning in every variation. So, for instance, bishop takes g4, queen h2, queen g2, queen g1, and we take the queen. Actually, not right away though. So bishop to queen to e3 check, g3 check, excuse me. So we'd like to win the queen for free if we can. c4, and we get to keep our rook. And meanwhile, the white king is horrible, and his bishops are both hanging. Black wins. Okay, so bishop takes g4 is a move too late. Okay, if rook to d3, trying to keep some more protection on f3, then check. And again, c takes d4 is winning. White can't afford to play rook takes d4 because then black will crash through on f3. And on knight to e4, then takes, queen h1, and rook f2 is checkmate. So it's kind of funny. The rook on d3 helped to protect f3, but it cut off the king. Okay, next variation. Bishop to g5. Trying to at least connect the rooks and distract the black queen. You should just ignore it. Takes, and rook f3, which is what the rook to d3 line was intended to stop. Okay, knight e4, protecting f2. And now, a good idea, bishop to f4. So we're going to trade off this active piece and threaten now queen to h1 check, followed once again by gobbling up the knight on e4. Okay, rook to e1, not to protect it, because that's impossible, but just to let the king slide over to the queen side. So check, here, rook takes, and queen h2, and again, black is winning, and he's even ahead of material, so we don't need to look at this line any further. When you're up material and you have the attack, that's all we need to see. Okay, so h3. And here I think Steve gave bishop to h2 check, which is probably fine, but bishop takes f3 is even better. So gh, again queen h3, cutting off the exit. f4. If f takes g4, then, okay, there's quite a few ways to win. Bishop h2, well, I'll show you. If fg, then check, and rook takes f2. And we've seen this variation before. So f4, bishop f4, and rook f4. And there's nothing really that white can do, that's good anyway, about the threat again of queen h2, followed by rook takes f2. Okay, so rook f8 was a winner. But bishop f3, it's a very natural move, and hard to believe that it can be that bad. So gf, and now very good move. Queen h3, again, sealing off the exit. So this move, I think, definitely deserves praise. Queen h2, certainly black is better there as well, but it's I like this move better. Okay, actually, let me think. Let me check my notes. Yeah, I think... Yes. Okay, there is one comment here that I need to make. So after queen h3, f4 is a mistake, and f takes g4 is better. And I think Steve said that this was a draw, but in fact, black has a win here. So check, and now not just perpetual, but rook f8. So we've seen this idea before. But the question is, well, how do we break down knight to e4? Well, here's the answer. Bishop g3, queen h2, and this time, of course, there's no queen h1 and queen e4, but bishop takes f2 is in fact quite strong. And the point is that after knight takes f2, then check, and the skewer, and material is fine for white. So the material is okay. I mean, he's got two rooks for the queen, but his king is very exposed and he's undeveloped, and black's knight is going to jump into the fray very quickly, and I think black is pretty close to winning at this point. So f4 is a mistake, but it's he didn't miss a draw. All right, so queen h2, king f1, rook f8. Okay, and here knight to e4 was played. Steve gives rook to d3 as an alternative, and he gives a line with knight d to f6. But I think that better is bishop takes f4. So again, this idea that we saw in the previous variation. So rook f3. Okay, if bishop takes, rook takes, it's very easy. So rook f3, bishop c1, rook f8, knight f8, rook c1. And after c takes d4, it doesn't look all that special for black, but it's actually better than it might seem. We'll see why. So for instance, knight to d1 to protect the f2 pawn some more. Because one idea that black has here is this, to play d3. So it's very sneaky. White can't play queen takes d3 because of f2. And if he moves the queen, let's say to d2, then queen h1 is mate. So this proves to be quite important. So knight to d1 takes care of f2, so that way on d3, queen takes d3 is possible. All right, but now queen h1 check, king e2, and knight e5. And because the knight's on d1 blocking the rook on c1, black has time to create a new batch of threats. Okay, so let's say queen to b1, getting out of the way. And now a very subtle move, queen to h6. The idea is, again, cutting off the exits. So this is a recurring theme here. So now d3 is a big threat because d2 and e3 are both covered by the queen. And when the king goes back to the back rank, to e1 or f1, then queen h1 is a big problem. Or knight to f3 check first. If king to e1, knight f3 check, and then queen h1, or if king f1, queen h1 mate right away. So white has to cough up the knight here, and in this position, the threats to the rook here, so white can't take the knight. In this position, black is winning. So he's got 2 knights and 2 pawns for a rook, and white has no compensation. Okay, so rook to d3 was not salvation for white either, or even close. So he played knight to e4. Now bishop takes f4. Here, okay, if rook to e1, then takes, c takes d4 with tons and tons of threats, black is winning. Or if king to e2, takes, and okay, threats rook takes f2, so rook f1 and bishop to e3, and black's ahead of material with an attack, so he's winning there. So king to e1 is right, and now black played bishop takes e1, which is a good move. It's fine, and he went on to win. But there's an even nicer move, and since there's nothing wrong with bishop takes c1, there was no special reason for Steve to have looked for it, but there's a great move for black, which I like much more than the move in the game, aesthetically, and I think it's at least as effective. It's bishop to d2 check. So the king can be the bishop can be taken 5 different ways, but it doesn't matter. They're all losing. So okay, let's look at them one at a time. If knight to d2, queen takes f2 is mate. That's easy. Okay, if bishop takes d2, rook f2, and it's over. Queen g1 mate is threatened, and if knight takes f2, queen takes f2 is mate. Okay, if king takes d2, then knight f2 is just winning. There's not really any great place for the king to run to. If king to c3, for instance, then I think rook f3 is winning. So this is a winning line without going into further details. If queen takes d2, then the key is that we've cut off an escape square from the white king. So queen h1, queen e4, so you can't go to d2 now. Knight h2 check, queen g4 check, and okay, if king h1, then knight to f3, followed by queen to h3 mate. Or if king takes, then rook f5, followed by rook to h5 mate. And if white tries queen to g5 to block this, then rook f2 and queen g2 is mate. So finally, there's rook takes d2, and now queen check, rook check, and we have some very nice lines from here. Okay, if king to d3, then rook f3 check. All right, king e2, queen f1 is mate. And if king to c4, there's a very nice mate in 2. There's actually 2 mates in 2. So you could play knight g to e5 check, de, knight takes e5 mate, but not the other way around. If you use this knight, that would be a blunder because of king takes c5. But the other mate is queen takes d4. Rook takes d4, knight g to e5 mate. So that's a pretty nice line. Okay, so back here, instead of instead of king to d3, there's knight takes f2. And here, queen d3, queen f2, king d3, queen e3, king c4, and now, again, knight g to e5, and knight takes e5 as mate. So, very pretty line. So, you have bishop to d2 to start off, and then you have this knight e5 mate, where you can even do it with a queen sack in some of the lines. Okay, so in the game, bishop takes c1 happened, rook a to c1. And here I played knight takes f2, which is actually a mistake. I mean, he's still winning. Okay, so don't want to exaggerate, but much easier, I think, is rook to f4. Again, with the idea of playing rook takes e4 check, and queen takes f2 mate, and also with the idea of queen h1 and grabbing on e4 in some cases too. So I think this would have basically won the game much more quickly. So in the game, knight takes f2 happened, and okay, the simplest point is knight f2, queen g1. So white gave up the queen, but here queen h1 would have been more effective than what was played. But okay, rook f2, knight f2, and in severe and very, very understandable mutual time trouble, black went on to win. So I'll just give the remaining moves for those of you who haven't watched Steve's video, but without any real further comment. A4, okay, rook c8 check might have been a little bit better, but black is winning in any case. T3, okay, rook takes d3 might be the best, but again it's hopeless, so rook c3, knight g4 is the most accurate move, but okay, queen f4, and okay, knight f3 is fine, but Mueller finds another very good idea, just to run the h-pawn up the board and create mating threats with it. And it also takes care of any back rank check worries. So, very, very simple. Mate on g2 is coming, so white has to cough up the knight. And in this position, white resigned. So, a very nice game by black. It was a completely sound attack. d4 was a very nice classical kind of breakthrough. It's a lot of the prettiest lines remained behind the scenes, which is generally the case even in top players' games. But overall, still a very, very nice game, and one that I hope you enjoyed. And for those of you who watched Steve's video and then this one, I hope you felt like the extra time was worth your while. So, and definitely, kudos to Steve for putting in a tremendous amount of work in his video. Okay, it was, maybe he felt like could have done more, but even so, he put in quite a bit of effort. So, thanks to him as well. All right, so I will see you next game. I'll see you next week with a new game. Take care. Bye-bye.